Hey, before we get too far started here looking at these pictures as we go through, I would like to remind all the students that what I know about this is not what I actually live, but what I actually read about and researched to find out about these. And I would strongly recommend all students to go basically into doing a lot of reading. I can always tell what kid is going to be the most successful in life whenever you find out, well, who's the best reader? And they say, John is the one that's going to advance in life more so than anybody else. Okay, we'll get in. We'll look over these pictures as we go through it. The football team there is probably on the northeast side of the football stadium, probably about where the concrete stadium's at right now. This picture was probably in the 40s. Now right down below, the old train picture with Bo Lambert's granddaddy sitting as the engineer, and this young man at the front of the train, he's known as well, I can't recall his name right now, but he was from Century. They both were from the Florida side, but they both live now. Well, both of them's dead now, but it was the Scambia Sand and Gravel Company. Right down below it is the old depot. Now this depot, the main part of this depot, this was about the third one that you see here with the trains and the cars along there. They moved the coal chute that's in the background way back there further down because they kept burning down the depots that they would put up there. And right down below that is a picture of the rock cemetery up above Flomaton, and that is where Miss Weaver, that was the secretary at the school here for many years, she went to school in this one-room schoolhouse, which is considered a church now. Occasionally they have weddings there.
And it's still standing, huh?
It's still standing. It's still there. Looks better there, up there now than it did then. And right down below you'll see a quick picture of a group of people there that has Dot Potomac, Miss Jackson, and Miss Jones. These people were dedicated Flomaton people, and that was the group that got together to form the 100 Years of Flomaton. And it's in the book, in the green book of Flomaton. And over to the right of that picture, you can see a group of high school softball players, girls from Flomaton. Now, somewhere in that picture is Miss Edwards. She was a Drury, and she's in that picture, and right offhand I can't tell you which one is Miss Edwards. And then right over side of that picture is the Flomaton Motor Company, where you'll see the gentleman out there with the old gas pumps, the old cars, and these dignitaries of Flomaton. And at one time, this building was used as a bottling plant for Flomaton. The building is still standing. It's right across from Barrow Furniture, right south of Northup Auto Parts, the big building there. And then right up above that picture, you'll see a group of black gentlemen that worked at the railroad. This were only a small group of men that worked there. And the guy seated the second left to right is Dave Stanley. He lived right across the line. Dave told me he was 19 years old when this picture was made. And this was the only job he had ever had, was working for the railroad. Great group of men. They all stayed there until they pretty much all retired there. Okay, and right up above that, you'll see in 1912 is a picture of the airplane where the Wright brothers broke down. Their plane did, and they was forced landing on some of the Mize property. And as they had to stay there a couple of weeks, they destroyed a man's cornfield, And they always told them, we'll come back, we're going to pay you for this. But when they got the part that they needed to repair the plane, they took off and were never heard from again. By the way, this was not Orville and Wilbur's in this plane. This was some of the guys that worked with them. Okay, and right up above, you can see, this is the Historical Society of Flomaton's park, right on Sidney Manning Boulevard there. By the way, Sidney Manning is a great man from Flomaton, the only Medal of Honor winner we've ever had. And Sidney had a big disadvantage in a roundabout way. He was fighting strictly on his own because Sidney had very little education. But anyway, that's the park, the old log cabin that was known as the Renfro home. It was built about 1867. And the other house was a house that used to sit right north of the Escambia County Bank. And over to our right, we'll see a picture, a group of black kids. They were right off the old Highway 31. And I apologize to Dewey Henderson because we got him cut off in that picture. But this was a group of black kids that went to school up there.
What was that school? Was that Fanny School?
No, that was not, well, they called it the Fanny School. Yeah, the Fanny Black School. And then later on we'll see a picture of the Fanny White School. They wasn't integrated yet. And there's a lot of good stories there. At the time, there was only 2 high schools for blacks to attend, Southern Normal and at Century. And there was kids that walked each day all the way from Pollard to Century to get an education. Okay, and you come right down below that picture, then you can see the picture of Mr. Drury and his store. Mr. Drury was Helen Edwards' father, and where you see this old store with a Pepsi-Cola sign and everything, Mr. Drury on the porch, that is where Escambia County Bank is at today. And Mr. Drury was a Civil War veteran. He lived here most all of his life. Their original old home has been remodeled, but it is still standing in Flomaton. Right down below that, you'll see the 1912 school over in Fanny. This land, there was 2 acres donated to the school and 2 acres donated for a church. And the school was eventually torn down, but it was over the Rosses. Mr. Ross donated the 4 acres for the school and the church. Neither one is there now, but it was a community back really before Flomaton got really off on their own. And Mr. Ross was considered quite a man. He ran a blacksmith shop during the Civil War, and he sent his family into the swamps during the war between the states, and they lived there to protect them. He shod horses for the South and horses for the North. So I guess they let him stand. He was on a little slough on the Ross property. And right down below that, you can see some of the Canes state softball teams right down below that. Great group of girls that does miraculous things for the involvement of the community and the students. It's a great picture. We'll move over a little bit further along, and you can see up at the top, you can see a picture of a group of gentlemen that worked for the railroad. And you can see Mr. Manry is on there and Mr. Ash. These are some of the people that's in that big, nice picture. Beautiful picture. It was taken right out in front of the old depot. During the time, the old depot, it was had a lot more tracks and a lot more space there, and they kept a lot of trains there. They come in, they was gone almost 24 hours a day. The railroad depot was known as the Railroad Junction of the South. Regardless of which way you went, north, east, south, west, you come to Flomaton to get on the train or switch over. And right down below that, you can see a good picture of the old, this was about the third depot, and you'll see the gentleman standing out front. And that was a great picture of the front of the depot. Over behind it was a goldfish pond that probably most of the parents, they can remember courting in the back of the old depot. That was one of the places you'd go and with your girlfriend or boyfriend and look at the goldfish in the ponds. Right down below, you can't see a lot of it, but one of the nicest men that Flomaton ever raised would be Mr. Dick Four. Leaning up against us, he started off hauling wood to become quite a successful man. And he left some great kids back, and I hope Sonny Four never sees this, but they all was great people, I thought, and they dedicated to the community of Flomaton. And right down below it, you can see the old Hart Hotel. Everybody stayed at the Hart Hotel if you come to Flomaton. And they usually had a little dish set out front, leave your money in the dish and just pick you out a room. They were on the honor system most of the time. And the old coach, Nolan, that used to be here, this was his parents that run the Hart Hotel. Even though it was a hotel before they got it, but most people would remember the Nolans. And right down below that, you'll see, I believe this was about a 57 or 58 picture of the main streets of Flomaton. Looking south towards the depot, you can see the Justice Rexall drugstore, the cars, the old theater, and if you look far enough down there, you can see Harwell's Western Auto Store. Also, if you can see the top of the old Hart Hotel. But it's right across, it starts right across from in front of Escambia County Bank. Now, right up above this is one of my most favorite pictures. It's a picture of the train with the smoke shooting out, the train's huffing and a puffing, moving west in front of the depot at Flomaton. But that's a beautiful picture. I've used it a number of times, and I guess it'll always remain one of my favorites. And we'll drop over here since we're into the depot, and this was an area where they kept a lot of supplies for the depot. Had a little side track over to your left there where they would keep supplies stored there while they were waiting for them to be shipped out. As a matter of fact, this picture here has the flood of 1929 in the background. The water was beginning to rise. It actually got up higher than this in Flomaton. It got to be at Northup Auto Parts place down there. The right side of that was a grocery store, and it got up 5 feet deep in that store in the flood of 29. Hopefully we've remedied that situation by trying to keep the rivers and the creeks open so the water could flush on out right into the bay in Pensacola. Practically everything we do over on the Alabama side affects the system over in Florida. So we've got to stay united and work together. Okay, and right up above that you'll see an old hotel. You see all the people out front. And this hotel was right in that triangular, right across the railroad tracks to the west. That hotel sit there. And if you'll notice up top, you'll see before they had a fire truck, they made their own fire preventions. Up on top of the building, you'll see the 55-gallon wooden kegs that they had sitting up there. And if there was a fire, they reached and they pulled that down and flushed on the building to try to put the fire out. But this hotel stayed there quite some years, but I would imagine more than likely it burned down, because these old buildings, they were made of fat lightered, and they usually were real combustible. They just blow up just about. But that was home to people. And right up above that, you can see the house like it's in the Historical Society of Flomaton's. This was right, let's see, right north of the Escambia County Bank. Now, this was the streets along there. These houses were right up the street. And if you see that big tall building to the far right over there, that's where the Methodist Church used to be. Now, it burned down, and eventually they rebuilt this church right across the street where it's at right today. But it was originally across the other side of the road. But that's just some of the stories up to that. And right up above that, you can see the old Pan Am bus station. It was owned by the Arringtons. They've been here for hundreds of years, it seems. I hope Jimmy don't hear that. But this is where, at one time, most people know it is where Mamie's restaurant used to be. Now, right actually north of that, they had a Sinclair station, too. But I think it was Pan Am, the gas station was Pan Am, right at the edge of where the creek bank went down was the old Pan Am station.
On the other side of that street.
Yeah, there's a picture of it right up above it. So that's where it was at, and if you went over actually to the left in the picture, you'd have vanished because there was a steep drop off there about 40 or 50 feet. Great picture, great picture. And we'll move over a little bit further. You can only see a small amount of a turpentine still. This is some more of the Mises. This was known as the government stores, and it really had very little to do with the government, but it still was known as a government store because of the fact that they provided turpentine for caulking of the ships. As a matter of fact, when the Pilgrims come over to Pilgrim Rock and so forth, their boat was patched with tar. They'd come out of the trees. I mean, they were way ahead of us. And right down below that, you'll see a group of people that used to work in the old shirt factory right down below, right at the bottom of the hill from the Flomaton bus station and also to that area right there on top of the hill. It was right down below it. That's the large people that worked there. It was a big employer for a number of years. And once again, we got a Flomaton State Championship. This is the baseball team. I think this was the first state championship y'all ever had. And let's see, your ex-superintendent, Billy Hines, he's in there. So we want to really recognize Billy Hines. I think he told me he played second base. I wonder how many errors Billy made. I know Billy. Okay, and then one of my favorite pictures is right down below that, and this was the second Flomaton Depot. Now this picture here represents the home of Mr. Chipley. He's the one who's responsible for the Flomaton area being Flomaton, because he's the one who decided to build the railroad junction right where it's at right today. And like I said before, he lived upstairs when he was here. Mr. Chipley was a very big man, and he ran the railroads, Pensacola. Chipley, Florida is named after him right today. And this was a great picture, beautiful depot there. This one and the first one both got burned down due to the fact where the old coal chute was right up there then. Well, it would spark and that burnt down these buildings. Over a period of time, they finally figured it out. They moved the coal chute right on down, and incidentally, there's only 2 left in the United States. And I hope the young people of Flomaton will unite and try to make sure that that is never torn down, that the railroad leaves it there. We let the depot get away. Let's don't let the coal chute get away. So,
tell the story about Mr. Chipley and the Harding.
Okay, we're going to go into that then. Okay, John Wesley Harding. Well, Mr. Chipley was the superintendent there at Flomaton at the depot. And here come this black guy come running by him, and here come the white guy right behind him with a pistol in his hand. Okay, well, Mr. Chipley goes, "Oh, wait a minute, son, where you going?" He said, "I'm going to kill that." And he said, "No, you're not." He said, "Yeah, and I'll kill you too." And he throwed his pistol on him. Mr. Chipley just got lucky that the hammer fell right between the webbing in his fingers there, and it stopped the shot. And when that happened, Mr. Chipley was a big man. He beat the devil out of Brown Bowen. Brown Bowen was John Wesley Hardin's brother-in-law. Real mean. They killed a number of men. As a matter of fact, the guy that tried to shoot Mr. Chipley was actually took back to Texas, and he was hung for killing another man. Mr. Chipley played a part in getting him shipped back to Texas. Well, Brown Bowen had a brother-in-law that was even worse than him. John Wesley Hardin. He supposedly killed at least 44 men. One man for snoring too loud in a hotel. Neat dressed guy. Brown was sort of a sloppy dressed guy, but John Wesley Hardin, he was always neat and clean and a gentleman. His father was a preacher. I'm sure his father didn't appreciate what he went into. He went into killing people, but he was an outlaw. And even to this day, you can still find logs in the Escambia River and Big Escambia Creek and Little Escambia Creek that is branded. And one of the reasons it's branded is because people like John Wesley Hardin and Brown Bowen would steal these. And so they would brand them so these men couldn't do this. But now John Wesley was finally captured in Pensacola. He had kinfolks. His wife's folks lived across from Pollard, across the river. And there's a story that goes that they had a ferry at Pollard. And Brown Bowen and his brother-in-law, John Wesley Hardin, they were going to cross the river at the ferry in Pollard, and they were going to go over that way. And so they were standing around playing cards. Well, up come this other guy that wanted to go along with them, play cards with them. Well, they got to playing cards before the ferry got back there, and they got to arguing a little bit. So either Brown Bowen or John Wesley Hardin whipped out their gun, and they killed the guy. I mean, that's the way they settled their arguments. There was none of this, "Oh, well, I'll get you later." It was get you right then. So they shot this guy, and they took him upstream a little bit and buried him somewhere up around Pollard. Pollard was the big town back during those days. When you left Pensacola coming north, you would stop off at, usually say at Cantonment. Molina hadn't been yet. Then you would move on up to Bluff Springs. There wasn't no Century, there wasn't no Flomaton yet. And then you would go to Pollard. That was the next big town. And right down below this picture of the depot, you can see one of the old Flomaton football teams. I wish I'd have brought along my list, could have told you most of those guys' names, but I always thought it was unusual that they had A.D. Worley as a football coach at one time. I didn't know A.D. was that good of a coach, but I guess he was. He got the job, and he did a good enough job. He stayed here a while. But it's good. It's good. It's been a great time talking about all these people and all these pictures.
I don't know if you told me, I read somewhere that we had some presidents that stopped here at different times when they were campaigning.
Yes, sir. One of my favorite presidents came through here, Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy came to Flomaton politicking on the train. Lyndon B. Johnson's, I believe it was Lyndon's wife, Lady Bird, came through town politicking for her husband and met a lot of people at the Flomaton Depot. And what surprised me, I grew up reading about Lady Bird and never particularly cared for them, but she was a short woman. She was 5'4", and I always thought she was a big, tall woman, but she was really short. But all these guys, usually if a guy is the president of the United States, he is quite a reader. He's a hard worker. A lot of the presidents didn't do a whole lot, I didn't think, but they give it their all. They deserve our credit regardless of who the President of the United States is.
You mentioned Sidney Manning and him being probably the most famous person to ever be from Flomaton. Do you think anybody else that came from Flomaton that you consider to be important in the history, not just of Flomaton, but...
They had a baseball player here. They had a baseball player here, and he's buried up above Flomaton, out in Hall Cemetery up there. Big Ed Morris was his name. And Big Ed very easily could have been the greatest baseball player that ever played the game. But now he was from Fauchy and Flomaton. He went to school here, I understand, and he lived up there on Tata Street. And when he come home, he'd bring just sacks of baseballs and give them to all the kids. That's what we need more of from these big folks. We'd love to have them share something with these kids. Give these kids a reason to participate. And Big Ed, he was signed with the Yankees. He was killed at Fanny Bridge. The night before he was leaving, going to the New York Yankees, they were having a party, and anyway, he got stabbed, and he swam the creek. They took him to Century Hospital, and he died a few days later with pneumonia. And he's buried up in Hall Cemetery right next to his mother. Now, Big Ed, he was going to be playing with the New York Yankees, and Babe Ruth made $125,000 a year during this time. Big Ed was signed to the contract for $100,000. And that meant he won more games that year with the Boston Red Sox than the rest of the entire team. And so the owner of the Boston Red Sox wound up selling him to the Yankees. And though he was going with the Yankees, and boy, he wanted to play with Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and that group of guys. But he happened to make a mistake and was killed right down at Fanny Bridge at a supposedly be a party for him. And so, yes, Big Ed was quite a guy. And he lived within 2 or 3 blocks of Flomaton High School.